Again, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for being late, but we're trying to accommodate as many folks as we can. House Bill 382, Representative Lindsay.
House Bill 382 simply provides for an authorization to allow the City of Atlanta to by local legislation, increase its hotel motel tax from 7 to 8%. Most of the surrounding counties already and cities already have the authorization to go from to be at 8%. Since the hotel motel tax works its way through the World Congress Center, we do not presently have that. And as the bill enumerates, the extra penny sales tax will go entirely to promoting the Atlanta Visitor and Convention Bureau to promote economic development, to promote convention traffic and tourism inside the city of Atlanta. It's a bill that's supported by the World Congress Center. It's supported by the Atlanta Convention Bureau. Obviously, it's supported by the hotel industry, and it also is supported by the city of Atlanta. And that's essentially the bill.
Oh, actually, at the appropriate time, I'd like to be recognized for a motion.
That wouldn't be right this minute, but
I know you call me first.
Secretary Sims.
Mr. Whip, on this, I guess my question to you is, do you have an estimate of what this is going to increase your revenues in the city of Atlanta for? Do you have a?
There is a estimate of around $6 million a year, and like I said, within the bill, it does require that all that money be spent toward promoting convention and visitor trade.
So you think it would be about $6 million?
Yes, sir.
The 1 cent would do that with the local.
That's the estimate, and like I said, it all goes toward promoting the economic development of the convention.
Follow-on question: I know that a physical note's not required with this one because it's local. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Representative Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The limitation on this to the city of Atlanta, I assume, is done by the 7%
Yes.
level. It's just as any municipality, but they're the only ones that.
They're the only ones who will fit within this.
Okay.
If you go through the various hotel motel taxes, you find we've constructed each of the amounts to fit different kinds of cities. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, most of the cities and counties surrounding the city of Atlanta are already at 8%, allow for 8%. And all we're doing here is allowing the city of Atlanta to go up to 8% as well. And once again, with the enthusiastic support of the hotel motel industry, I might add.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, Representative Abrams.
Move to pass LC 189882S HB 382 by substitute.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Thank you,
Bill
Mr. Chairman.
passes. Thank you, sir. Representative Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before you House Bill 164. This bill does a couple of things. First, it cleans up the coin-operated amusement machine game bill from last year. In passing that law last year, we didn't bifurcate the class of machines between the bona fide coin-operated amusement machines, the kind you see in the gas stations, from the kiddie games, the skee ball that you see at the jumping jelly beans type place where kids have birthday parties, or the Monkey Joes. And those business owners are incurring tremendous costs because they're having to pay the same license fees that the coin-operated amusement machine operators are. It's costing just thousands of dollars. I have a facility just near my house in Peachtree City, and the owners live in the county, and it is on the verge of breaking them. And that's going on all over the state. So Section 1 of the bill simply just bifurcates the Class A and the Class B. So we're pulling out the what are the true kiddie games from the regulatory scheme of the bona fide coin-operated amusement machine games. Section 2 and Section 3, similar to what we did in 1055 last year, authorize the Revenue Commissioner to retain a percentage of the licensing fees to administer the regulatory enforcement we're asking of them in the bill. There is a fiscal note in your folders, I believe. The legislation is a net positive fiscal impact to the state of about $1 million. Section 4 permits the disclosure of the name, address, and license number of master license holders in facilities where a company has an exclusive agreement with a restaurant, for instance, to provide games, and they come in to service those games and see another license holder has games placed at that location. Right now, they have no ability to contact them to let them know that that they already have an exclusive arrangement with that facility, and this will give them the ability to do so. Section 5, again, it just allows for the retention of a percentage of the license fees for administration by the Revenue Commissioner. Section 6, right now, you can only be paid in awards for these bona fide coin-operated amusement machine games. You can only receive non-cash prizes, merchandise primarily. What this bill will allow you to do is reward successful players with gift cards. And again, you will be expressly prohibited those gift cards from being redeemed for cash or alcohol, tobacco, the kind of prohibitions we have right now. But what it will mean is right now, if you're a successful player, whether he redeems his successful points for a teddy bear or a television, he's walking out with that item, but there's no sales tax being paid. By allowing for the redemption in the form of a gift card, they're going to have to take that gift card and use it to buy, whether they're going to buy a teddy bear or a television, they're going to go and sales tax are going to be paid on the purchase of that item. That's not captured in the fiscal note, but we believe that's going to result in a good additional bit of revenue to the state in the form of sales taxes by doing that simple little change in the law. Section 7 is an effort to address a rapidly proliferating problem we have around the state right now. All over the place, these internet cafes are popping up to providing for these sweepstakes games. In Representative Flood and mine's home county of Fayette County, I got a call last week from the city of Fayetteville city manager that they had this company come in and say, we're going to set up a business center, and essentially what they're operating is a mini casino. They're offering these sweepstakes games through computer terminals. It is a no-skill game, and they're actually allowing them to redeem their winnings for cash. And there's an ambiguity as to whether or not the way that they're conducting their business model that we can actually enforce our laws prohibiting such practices. This will provide for regulation of those electronic machines in the same manner that the bona fide amusement machines are being regulated under current law right now. It will limit to 2 the number of machines a company or a facility could offer these type of games through. It will limit them to only redemption for non-cash items, the way the bona fide amusement machine is restricted under current law, and provides for licensure similar to what the amusement games are required to go through right now under current law. So with that's a quick thumbnail of the bill, and be happy to yield for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from members of the committee for the author of the bill? Yes, sees none. I'll entertain a motion. Motion to do pass in a second. All in favor signify saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Bill passes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chair calls House Bill 234. Representative Stevens. I'm sorry, I'm told he had to step out for a moment. I ask him if he's ready on 160. Chair calls House Bill 346. Vice Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I'm reaching for the bill. Members of the committee, it's House Bill 346. Members of the committee, if you'll remember last year, we passed out of the House, and it was signed into law, a bill that we were going after deferred compensation, or at least withholding from deferred compensation on non-resident taxpayers. That law still stands, but after we realized that it had passed out, we realized that there were some issues that we had to clear up regarding compliance issues. And as it was written, there was no guidance. A lot of the businesses were out there were trying to figure out, how are we going to comply with this? Retroactively go back and maybe look for records that we had not kept or did not have the ability to go and look for. And so what we've done is we've basically provided the guidance and the clarification as to how our businesses are going to comply with collecting the estimated tax payments for this deferred compensation for people who once lived in Georgia and earned it here, but who are no longer living in Georgia. Real briefly, we've made sure that we tied in the definitions of deferred compensation and the non-qualified deferred comp into the Internal Revenue Code, and we've set the date that basically going forward from January 1, 2011 is when we're starting to apply the rule, and we're also making sure that they understand that we're using a days worked in Georgia method. So what this is doing is giving our businesses clarity and allowing them to make sure that they know the rules that they've got to abide by in order to be in compliance with this law. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield for questions. If not, I'll ask for the favorable consideration of the committee.
Any questions from the members of the committee of the author? Seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion.
Move to pass.
Second. Motion made and seconded. Do pass. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Bill passes. Chair calls House Bill 228. This is Representative Austin. I'm told he has the flu, and Vice Chairman Knight will be presenting the bill on his behalf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of committee, we've seen this before. In fact, we had passed something out, and we've had issues with the past governor and some veto language. But basically, what this is unidentifiable sales and use tax proceeds that basically it's our local governments. And as you know, the state collects on behalf of the local governments, and we need to remit it. But what occasionally happens is that they get unidentifiable sales and use tax proceeds, and we need to make sure they have the authority under law to send it back to the local governments. And if you'll look at on line 9, what we're basically doing is repealing, I guess, a sunset clause, basically giving them permission to go on indefinitely to have authority to remit these unidentifiable sales and use tax proceeds back to our local governments. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield for any questions.
And members of the committee have questions of Vice Chairman Knight. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion made, do pass and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
We do 240. Represent.
House Bill 325, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you House Bill 325. As most of you know, several years ago, 4 years ago, we passed a Student Scholarship Organization Act. At that time, we knew that we'd have to come back and do some revisions. It's a very detailed piece of legislation. And, Mr. Chairman, that's what this is. This is your substitute. Let me make sure I'm reading off the correct substitute, please. It's LC 189890S.
That's
should
correct.
be the, is
That's
that correct,
correct.
Mr. Chairman? Thank
Yes.
you, sir. Let me state in the beginning that this act, this particular revision contains none of the significant changes from the original. There are no changes to the, or at least substantive changes. There is no change to the cap. There is no change in acceleration. There's no 75% with respect to subchapter S corporations. What we're left with is basically revisions and efficiencies, and I'll go through those fairly expeditiously. Section 1 just restates this is a multi-year scholarship. In other words, if you go to the University of Georgia or any other college institution, it's implied that you have a multi-year. You don't get the entire amount first year. That's just a clarification of the language. And on the second page, this is verifying the obligation of the scholarships for 90%. Just once again, a clarification that's been asked for by the legal side of the equation in this. Coming on down, Section 22A3 on page 2, this is the reporting requirements. This is so that we can gather more data, have more knowledge of what's happening here. This is the total number and dollar value of the corporate contributions. This is merely so that the people of the state of Georgia and this legislature can understand what it is that's actually taking place in this program. Turn over to page 3. Coming on down to line 64, this is transparency provisions. It says the department shall post on its website the information received from these student scholarship organizations. Again, a transparency issue. Lines 70 through 72, this is restating. This is a protection so that once any of this information on the aggregate amount of the information is out there from the SSOs themselves, that no personal taxpayer confidential information is ever placed in there. That's what that does. On page 4, these are the penalties for bad behavior. In case there ever becomes an SSO that doesn't comply with the law, there's some fairly significant cease and desist, and it has downsides to bad behavior. No changes on page 5. Page 6 is the next set of changes in line 163 to 169. This just says that the department cannot take any adverse action against a donor who they've already qualified. And, Mr. Chairman, that's it. There's really very little to this. It is a revision.
Representative Flood has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Earhart, thank you for making the changes. I had a question with regard to the reporting requirements. On lines 59 through 61, the bill requires that reporting be done for students receiving scholarships whose income do not exceed the 200% poverty level. Are there any guidelines or expectations for how much of the money would be allocated to students above the 200% poverty level?
No guidelines at this point. What we're trying to do is determine what that is. I can tell you from experience anecdotally that a significant amount of that is, most of these scholarships are significantly needs-based. So I know in the experiences that I'm very familiar with that probably 60 to 70% are at that level. But that's anecdotally. But that's what we'd like to be able to determine with this type of data.
Further question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Would there be some value in having more specificity around means testing? If that seems to be the goal in the application?
I guess I would submit that since it tends to be the outcome anyway, why take away the flexibility? Generally, my experience with taking away that type of flexibility is you're generally going to set up a situation where somebody is right on the edge of something like that. What if you're a family that has a child that may qualify, except that you're at 199%? Would you really want to take that capacity for flexibility away because we set in some arbitrary guideline as a statutory authority? That would be the way I would answer that question.
Thank you.
Any further questions from members of the committee of the author? Seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion. Moved and seconded that do pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Here goes House Bill 240, Vice Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring before the committee's consideration House Bill 240. First of all, I want to thank the folks out in the audience, some of the members, our GMA and ACCG for their help in this bill, and also want to my co-sponsor Chairman Powell. We spent a lot of time, and I think we vetted this bill very well, and I think this is one of the issues where you come up and you find there's no relief under the law for a particular situation, and I think that's what we have here, and it's dealing with SPLOST. Currently up under the law, there's a relief valve when there's excess funds in a SPLOST and all the projects are completed. And there's direction when more proceeds are collected than were needed, and all projects were completed. But what we found was that up under law, when we have a SPLOST and particular projects were not completed, and particularly those projects had become either infeasible or not in the best interest of the community, there was no remedy for our local governments to handle the money that had been collected. They were almost in a no-win situation where they couldn't spend the money that they had been collected, but they could not go forward with a project that had become infeasible. And so that's what this bill does, is it provides a remedy under law such that if we get in a situation, there is definitely a means to follow, and that's basically what this bill does. And I'm at any time my co-sponsor can jump in and help here, but basically that's what we've done through a process where either a local government, a county, or a municipality passes a resolution. It goes back before the people, and I want to make sure that we let everybody know the people voted on and told the elected body, hey, these are the projects, and we voted on them. The only way they can take and undo this is to go back before the voters and ask for permission not to do this. And the voters can either say, hey, you're going to do it, continue with the project, do it, or no, we let you out. And we think that's very fair, and it gives, again, our final say-so back to the citizens. So that's in a nutshell what this bill does. And Chairman Fowle, I don't know if you've got any follow-up. I know you worked very hard on this bill, but we're happy to take any questions from the committee.
Questions from members of the committee? Representative Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had this question the other day after our committee here, and I forgot to ask you, so I apologize. But in a scenario, I have to make sure I understand the timing. Let's say you've got, for instance, down in Bibb County, we've got a project that has become infeasible. There's money still there. It hadn't been done, but there's not going to be a SPLOST vote anytime soon. Is this creating a new opportunity? Because it seems like it's saying that you have to have the vote at the end on another SPLOST vote. Is that right?
I think that is correct, and I know Chairman Powell, Mr. Chairman, would may be able to elaborate on that portion.
I guess the question is, what if there's not another opportunity for a SPLOST vote? I mean, that didn't happen, but I mean, it could.
Well, we did discuss that.
And Powell, you are
yes, sir.
recognized.
Yes,
Go ahead, sir.
We did discuss that, and we debated back and forth as to whether to call it at the next general election or the next primary election. But we ultimately decided that, first of all, there are some of these projects out there that, for whatever reason, haven't been funded because they were not feasible, and there are pockets of money out there that are 10 or 15 years old. And so the primary concern was to give an escape valve rather than to do it as expeditiously as possible. And so we decided that, number one, to save taxpayers' money, that it was best to do it in conjunction with a new SPLOST vote. And what that would do is, number one, it would save having to call an extra referendum. And number two, that it would at least reduce the opportunity for game playing, because sometimes people forget, but if you do it in conjunction with a new SPLOST and the voters are upset about it, then they may punish a local government in the new SPLOST call that, heck, 3 of the last 5 that you've done, you didn't, that you called for and we approved, you didn't do, and now you want more money for a new SPLOST. We think that will make local governments be more deliberative. It will prevent them from putting projects that they know are infeasible at the beginning on a SPLOST, because they know that they will ultimately be called to account for it. So it could have been done either way, but that was the way we came out, that we felt like that would be the best way to prevent gamesmanship, to reduce the cost of calling an extra referendum.
And I'm with you on that, and I'm supportive of the bill. I'm just trying to make sure that you're in a situation where maybe there has been projects and there's not going to be a SPLOST vote for a period of time. Is there any remedy to be able to go back and?
No.
There wouldn't be.
No.
And so until a SPLOST vote is called again, that money would just be sitting there.
That is correct.
Okay. I know that's unusual, but it could happen. So I'm hoping there would be a remedy for that type of scenario. This is obviously a great attempt to get what you want to do. And so
We considered a lot of different options, and ultimately what we decided is this is going to solve 95 to 100% of the problem, and if it later comes out that there's some unusual problem that we didn't think of, then we can come back and tweak the law, but we didn't want to put too many things in there, what if, and then wind up that the bill becomes so complex that, it's not understandable.
Yeah, I think it's a great solution. That's a good solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harbin has a question.
That wasn't really a question. I was just going to reiterate that under the current law, that money would sit there and does sit there. So there's really no remedy. I think what they were trying to do was, as he pointed out, put that safety valve in place. So, I mean, I just wanted to make that point again, because right now that money's sitting there and you can't do anything about it.
I was worried about never had SPLOST.
I've been around for a few years, and I haven't seen that many counties or cities that don't decide to do a SPLOST at some point in
I
time.
defer to your wisdom, judgment, which I know is.
They might get beat, but they'll always try something.
Yeah. Okay.
Representative Sims.
I'd just like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, you recognize for a motion.
Move to pass.
Motion made and seconded, do pass House Bill 240. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Representative Stevens on House Bill 234.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, this is just an extension of a sunset for the sales and use tax on engine parts and equipment and the repair. Essentially, this is already in effect for our major carriers. We did this, I think, twice before, and it's kept jobs in Georgia. In fact, created some. In my part of the state, it's about 2,500 that had a big piece of that, and along with the Pratt Whitney plant in Columbus, and also the other airplane repair shop in Augusta.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize.
Yeah, 234.
234.
Okay. Well, apparently everybody's got the bill except me. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And again, Mr. Chairman, this is no more additional money, but there is a ton of jobs that are associated with it that, as it relates to airplanes and expensive repairs, $500,000 at a clip at times, and it brings us in line with other states that do not charge for service, sales tax on service or the parts, and that's essentially all it does.
Vice Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those bills, I know there's been a lot of talk about exemptions, but I want to remind the committee that this is an exception. These planes fly in and out, and they can choose to go anywhere they want to go to get repaired. Just like you can probably choose to go to any repair shop in town. with that much ease. And I think this is a good bill, and I appreciate what we've done over the years to make Georgia a very aviation-friendly state. And I applaud the author, and I appreciate it. And we'll make a motion at the appropriate time.
Any further questions from committee members of the author? Hearing none, Vice Chairman Knight, you are recognized for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we pass. You've got my copy, House Bill 234, by committee substitute.
Motion made and second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Bill passes. House Bill 233, President Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 233 is a bill that would allow the exemption for locomotive fuel. If you'll look at the fiscal note, well, that, I think they've given out a lot. I mean, I don't. Yeah. 233.
No.
I think.
No, it's 233. Well, I don't. We got to check and see if have we got the bill.
Yeah. This was one of them come up from that last minute subcommittee there, Mr. Chairman. I think they were trying to get it out.
Well, first of all, a question from the city. Does everybody have the bill in front of them? Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You should have a fiscal note. Fiscal note, if you'll look at it, it talks about on the back, the last paragraph, assuming that diesel prices are 10% above their average in 2010, that we're looking at a $7.5 million impact to the state. But I would also like to say, from an economic development standpoint, you know, railroads provide a lot around this state, especially in small rural communities. With the price of diesel going up like it is, I think that you're going to see a lot more people now that are looking to the railroads to be able to transport their product up and down and throughout the state. And I think this is a good measure for us to move forward at this time. We're one of only a few states that actually charge the motor fuel tax anyway. So I'd be glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my concern is not the temporary extension, but why we would move to a permanent extension. And what I'd like to understand is, you referenced other states. Can you do a comparative between the states that currently do this and do not, and whether or not they have the level of locomotive traffic that we have here in Georgia?
Well, I would say that right now, if you'll look at it, and I wish I had a map that I could show you the rail system that goes throughout this country. As you, I know that you're aware of, is very extensive and goes throughout the states. We're one of there's only a very few, and I apologize to you for not having the exact states that are still left that offer this, but most every state completely eliminates it. And we're one of the only few states that still have it on there. I mean, we've got over 5,000 miles of track through this state that goes in and out of every single county here. I mean, the railroad industry employs over 7,200 people. Their annual payroll is roughly somewhere close to $500 million that comes from that. The industry also invests back in about $250 million a year into Georgia over the last couple of years in investment in infrastructure and track. And I think that when you can make the argument that locomotives are running up and down the tracks, they're not running up and down the roads. So therefore, they're paying the motor fuel tax, yet they're not utilizing the roads.
Thank you.
Representative Martin, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, I think in subcommittee the other day, this was mentioned, if not by you, by somebody else, but is it not true that the 4R Act, which is a federal law that speaks to how states can even tax railroads in certain places, is being tested around the country about whether states even have this right to do that? I only asked you that.
That's correct.
Put it on the record here, and that might address your wish to make this permanent rather than a temporary extension. It looks like we would be almost preempted, or may have actually been preempting the 4R Act.
That's correct.
Inadvertently over the years.
You're correct, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harmon.
Motion.
We still got a few questions. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not opposed to your bill, but I've got a question.
Sure.
And the question is this. Some of the exemptions that we have done are either to encourage expansion in this state or retain business, like, for instance, the previous one that we did on aircraft parts. Those folks can go anywhere in the country, and so we wanted to encourage those kinds of maintenance facilities in the state of Georgia because they provide jobs in Georgia. My question is, I know this benefits the railroad industry. I know they do a lot for this state. But how do we reconcile that with industries that can go elsewhere, that can create jobs elsewhere, and we're either trying to get them to expand in Georgia or we are trying to get them to create jobs or retain them in Georgia, whereas the railroad, as long as there are people who are willing to pay freight costs, they're going to be here, I would think. And so I don't know how do we reconcile those two different scenarios.
Good question. I'm actually glad you asked it, because right now, down, as you know, there's two Class 1s. There's Norfolk Southern and CSX here in the state of Georgia. You also have 22 short lines in the state of Georgia as well. And right now, currently, down in South Georgia, in an area close to yours and close to mine, down in Berrien County, we've got an issue where we have two big corporations that's down there that employ several hundred people. And right now, because we've got an issue with the railroad, the track down there, and the state's got to go in and do some repair work on it because the state actually owns it, they have not been able to get material delivered to them. And there's an expansion that's going on in one of those companies that's going to bring in several hundred more jobs. It's about a $40 million investment that's going to go in down there. But if we can't get that track repaired, then that expansion is not going to take place in Georgia. It's going to take place in another state. So when we look at railroads, I think that what they can bring to small rural communities as well as to our bigger cities is the opportunity for the expansion on that track. As you well know, when it comes to grains and those types of things, being able to get them to the port. I mean, we're looking at an inland port that's being created down in Cordell right now as well to be able to keep the truck traffic from being able to, I mean, we're expanding the port, so therefore we're trying to keep that truck traffic down. And by expanding these railroads and by giving them this opportunity, they will then turn around and invest that money not only back in infrastructure, but I believe in businesses from expansion throughout the state and to be able to create more jobs.
I waive.
Any further questions of members of the committee for the author? Chair sees none. Representative Harvin.
Mr. Chairman, I move House Bill 233 do pass.
Motion made and seconded. The bill do pass. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The bill passes. Chair calls House Bill 168. Vice Chair of this committee, Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the, well, I won't say long anticipated, but very much a bill that we've been waiting on, the annual update bill. I'm going to try to be brief and go through this quickly, but basically we see this every year, and if we look in Section 1, this is what we're coming in with the federal our IRC update. And again, I apologize for members for the tardiness. I think our Congress was a little late fooling with the federal tax code, and their tardiness, I think, fell down to the state level. And so we've been working diligently, and I appreciate the department's work with this, trying to get this wrapped up as we got to the federal tax code. But basically, every year we update our code for them, for the changes made at the federal level. And we're basically incorporating the 2010, some of the changes from the Tax Relief Act, the Small Business Jobs Act, the Health Care Act, the HIRE Act, and the Medicare and Medicaid Extenders Act. And the highlights of this, again, as we do every year, and I think what applies to what most Georgians are waiting for, is the Section 179 and our write-offs. If you go through your chart, I'm going to go through briefly with you. Basically, after we wrap all this up, the highlights of this are we've basically kept Section 179 at $250,000. That's what we have done in the past. There were recommendations that came back to make it lower, but I think, and we all know, that right now is not the time to be trying to put limits on our business, and I know that they can certainly use that as they're trying to recapitalize, buy the tools and buy the equipment that they need in their business. And so we've decided to make sure that we retain the $250,000 Section 179 that we've had in the past. We've also, one of the bigger issues that we had was we were going to limit the itemized deductions. Again, we've chosen, now's not the year to be hitting people, so we've chosen to keep the itemized deductions the same as it was last year. We also thought that was a big compliance issue with trying to separate and do the adjustments from the federal calculation to the state calculation. And I'll also point out on the last page of the chart, we've also accepted and continued to keep the research credit deduction in there. And again, this is not the year, I believe, to be hurting our businesses and stifling entrepreneurship, especially these folks who are out in the front line doing the research R&D that we need to make Georgia a better, more moving forward. So that's the big part of this. If you'll notice on the fiscal note, we've tried to be as judicious as we could. And if you look at the bottom there, from the IRC update alone, is $28 million for 2011, $28 million from 2012, and then going down in 2013 to $8 million, and then again popping back up in 2014. Again, some of that is the reversal of the tax timing of the depreciation, the accelerated depreciation. So that would be the IRC update. Any questions at this point on the IRC update? If not,
any
we'll
questions of the author? Seeing none.
All right. Well, no, we got more updates. So that was Section 1.
Oh, excuse me. Excuse me, sir.
It's lengthy. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Section 2 of the bill is dealing with updates that we had with streamlined sales tax. As everybody knows, we passed and became a member of streamlined sales tax, and we've got some updates that we need to do in order to make sure that we're in full membership with streamline. And if you go through the bill, in Section 2 of the bill, our purpose is really to add definitions and change definitions so that we're in compliance. And a lot of these definitions we must do now in order to make sure that we do not, and I want to make sure the committee hears this, we don't broaden or narrow exemptions. We're not trying to change anything or the taxability. We're trying to make sure that we don't broaden or narrow exemptions. And so a lot of this may look lengthy, but we're adding definitions and taking out definitions, certain part. Section 3, we're further defining food and dietary supplements. We're reinstating, and I know everyone has been probably hearing a lot of the capital I have with the hearing aid exemption. We've got that back in here, so I think a lot of people are very happy about that. We continue on sales price. We've changed the definition to include for seller for services. These were charges of necessary services, and they're including in the sales price on line 99. Section 4 cleans up our exemption code for section for purposes. Specifically, again, we're going back and changing the definition of school food lunches to food and food ingredients for those changes that we've made earlier in the section. We continue on all of those changes, clarifying again on paragraph 5, reinstating the definition for the hearing aids, the audiologist, and continuing on page 5. These are section 5 deals with administrative changes to our exemption certificate process for the department. The department's asked us to make sure that we put in statute what they already have in department regulation, and it includes provisions about the proper use of the streamlined sales and use exemption certificate. And this section outlines the provisions set forth in the Act, and it's recommended by the Business Advisory Committee of the Streamlined Sales Tax, and they want us to make sure we've got this codified. Section 6 is for streamlined tax purposes. We've got to offer deduction, the refund for the bad debt for sales tax. We've got to do this across the board. We currently offer deduction but not a refund. And then finally, Section 7, the department has asked us to change the gross proceeds to sales price so that our terms are consistent throughout the sales tax chapter as required by the Streamlined Sales Use Agreement. Also, this section also corrects inconsistencies between fiscal and calendar years for the purpose of estimated tax payments. We've made sure that we kept that equal. We don't want to bring anybody new into it or let anybody out, so there are no changes there. And finally, we get to Section 9. It codifies provisions regarding the the certified service providers that we already have in an emergency department regulation. So we're just codifying what we already have in regulations. Mr. Chairman, that's it. Boring, but necessary.
Is there questions, members of the committee, of the author? I would remind you.
It's the end of the day, and I'm almost out of gas.
All right, Representative Martin, I would remind you it's getting close to cocktail hour. I see no questions. Chair will entertain a motion. Motion made and seconded. Do pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The bill passes. That completes our agenda for today. We will be having a full committee meeting on Monday, and we may be having some subcommittee meetings tomorrow and Monday at a time and place to be determined. Thank you for your attendance, and sorry we're late getting started.